It had just turned dark when Shaw reached Live House. He pushed open the unlocked door and involuntarily raised his eyebrows. Since the street was mostly empty, Shaw thought Live House would be desolate except for a couple of stray cats, but instead it was half-packed. Jensen, the lead singer of the band, brightened up at the sight of Shaw.
"You're here."
He stood up and patted Shaw on the head.
"You skipped class again last night, didn't you?"
Shaw drew down the corners of his lips disdainfully.
"I've already turned in the homework. That old man has no control over me."
He placed the bass on the stage, straightened his back in a casual manner, then nudged Jensen with his elbow.
"Can we play something new tonight?"
Jensen said in a conflicted tone.
"But the customers love the songs we've been playing."
Huh. Boring.
Shaw pouted and drew down his eyelids. He didn't say another word. As the evening got darker, the music grew louder in Live House. In front of the bar counter, Shaw had his head down and his eyes glazed. Colorful lights danced across his face, giving it a mysterious quality.
"Hello, wanna be friends?"
A soft voice spoke, and a dolled-up girl walked over, followed by what appeared to be her wing women. Shaw raised his hands to press his earphones, pretending to hear nothing. Undeterred by Shaw's apparent aloofness, the girl brushed her hair behind her ear, took a step closer, and said with a sweet, graceful smile,
"Perhaps we can exchange numbers."
Shaw tilted his head back to down the cola in a gulp. Then he finally stood up.
So much noise in here. I'm gonna go get some fresh air.
With that, he lazily stretched and strode past the girl without so much as a sideways glance. Seeing all this, Jensen let out a deep sigh. He had lost count of how many times this had happened. He took out a tissue and handed it to the girl who stood rooted to the spot.
"Here, let it all out."
When the exciting performance was over and the audience left, it was already midnight, and Live House returned to silence. Light poured down from the street lamps that stood silently along the dark road and fell on Shaw's slender figure. He carried a bass on his back and had both hands in his pockets, looking a little bored. One of his bandmates enthused.
"Come on, let's go grab a late-night bite."
Walking slowly behind, Shaw snorted and shook his head. Just another boring day. Noticing Shaw's lack of enthusiasm, Jensen paused in his steps.
"What's wrong?"
Shaw shrugged.
Same old, same old.
Jensen was puzzled by this nonsensical answer. Before he could ask for an explanation, a clear ding sounded, breaking the silence of the alley. Shaw stopped in his tracks and hurriedly took out his phone. His eyes lit up when he saw the title of the message. As he quickly scrolled down, the corners of his mouth curled up in a cheeky smile that was made clearly visible by the light of the screen.
Interesting.
Shaw turned around, waved, and walked away.
You go ahead without me. Bye.
Shaw sat on the railing by the bridge with one leg curled up. The lights from the banks cast colorful reflections on the dark river and illuminated his excited face. He casually picked up a stone from the ground, leaned back a bit, and tossed it into the river, creating ripples and splashes. He repeated it a few more times, and just as he was enjoying it, he heard laughter from nearby. Displeased by the disturbance, he frowned and looked to where the sound came from. It was a group of young people roller skating down the street. A bunch of daredevils were causing a ruckus in the middle of the night when most people were staying in the safety of their homes.
Huh.
Shaw jumped from the railing. There was excitement in his eyes.
Hey, do you dare to accept my challenge?
The group of youngsters who happened to be resting turned their heads in unison. The night outlined Shaw's silhouette, his gray and purple hair fluttering under the streetlight. The boy who looked like their leader was the first to respond.
Aw, do you have a death wish?
Unfazed by the provocation, Shaw raised his left eyebrow.
Cut the crap. Yes or no?
The boy was goaded into accepting the challenge.
Bring it on!
After putting on the borrowed roller skates, Shaw did a few spins on the spot and muttered satisfyingly,
These will work.
The rules of the challenge were quickly set. They start from under the bridge towards somewhere 5 blocks away. Whoever reaches the destination wins. As soon as the starting signal was given, more than half a dozen youngsters sped off at the same time. After shooting a glance at the few ahead of him, Shaw slowly smirked. Then he changed his position and quickly caught up. In the pitch-black darkness of the night, the streets of Loveland City were empty for blocks, except for these ninja-like speeders scaling walls and sliding down railings, quite like sparks of fireworks breaking the silence of the night. Among them, one spark outshined the rest. In a matter of 30 seconds, Shaw had left the others far behind, and their distance kept growing. The sound of roller skates grinding against the street could clearly be heard. Rumble. As Shaw made a dash for the finish line, rumbles of thunder sounded, and it began to rain. Raindrops slid down his hair and gave his confident face a crystal-like sheen. Shaw made the final leap. He won the race, leading the others by an entire block. Standing on the wall, he could see the big empty bridge in its entirety not far from here. The street lamp stretched out his shadow on the ground. He hadn't felt this good in a very long time. Shaw raised his eyebrow and thought to himself, glad I acted on that whim. At least. Finally, the curtain was about to rise amid a tidal wave of drum beats. At daybreak, there was not a trace of sleepiness left in Shaw. Faint rays of sunlight streamed through a corner of the window and left a soft glow on his bed. He idly tapped the screen of his phone and saw the clock strike 5 exactly. He sat up with his back against the headboard, casually scratched his hair, and opened a web page. After a few taps with his long fingers, a deluge of news flooded the screen. Recently, the show Miracle Finder. According to medical experts, the recent flu could be. After quickly going through the news, a meaningful smile crept up his face and crinkled his eyes into long slits behind his messy bang.
It's time. Gotta spice things up a little.
He murmured these words with a half-smile, then looked up at the brightening sky. He slung a long black bag over his shoulder and scaled the back gate of the school. Just like yesterday, the whole city seemed to be in deep slumber, with not a single soul to be seen on the streets. Every now and then, a couple of sparrows would hurry through the sky as if startled. He checked his phone and saw it was still early. He decided to take a less traveled road. He thought, maybe it's not such a bad idea to adventure a little before the mystery is solved. He put down his skateboard, put on gloves, and bent forward. Swoosh! He sped off like a lightning bolt. In a matter of moments, the puddles in the middle of the road erupted into droplets. The next, the fallen leaves hundreds of meters away flew into the air. After entering another sharp bend, Shaw squatted down and touched his gloves to the ground, creating fleeting sparks. A few moments later, he saw in the distance a stretch of uneven road that was under construction and grew more excited. Without slowing down and with steadiness, he jumped over one hurdle after another. Finally, the beast inside him had escaped through the opening in the cage and was now galloping in a no-man's land, bathed in the morning sunlight. And now came the fun part, waiting. What would come next were not undercurrents, but tidal waves. After a few fun detours, Shaw slowed down a bit. That was when a bus slowly rumbled by. Painted on its back was the eye-catching number 330, which glowed red in the sun. Shaw squinted and gave the ground a kick, sending himself toward the bus station. He casually glanced into the bus, his eyebrows slightly raised. Probably because it was the first bus of the day, there were no passengers inside, only the driver. Just then, an indistinct announcement was broadcast from inside the station.
Thank you for taking bus number 330. Next station, Loveland Hospital.
The bus door was closed with a bang, followed by a honk, and the sound of the broadcast began to fade. Shaw picked up his skateboard, thrust one hand into his pocket, and leaned lazily against the platform. He casually fixed his hair that had been messed up by the wind when skateboarding. The upbeat music in his earphones sounded clearly against the silence of the street. He seemed a little tired of the song and decided to listen to something different, so he took out a strangely shaped music player from his pocket. He switched from one song to another, but none seemed to suit his taste. He snorted, and impatience darkened his eyes. Finally, his eyes lit up when he got to a Green Day song. He took his finger off the next song button and started to hum along while thrusting his hands back into his pockets. The sun peeked through the overcast clouds and brightened up the sky. With music playing in his ears, Shaw gazed into the distance, lost in thoughts. But every time bus number 330 pulled into the station, he would withdraw his gaze and shoot it a glance. Not a single time did he get on the bus. After some time had passed, two young girls came to the station.
Do we wait here for the bus?
The girls seemed new to Loveland City and spent a fair amount of time studying the bus routes. They wanted to ask Shaw, who stood next to them with eyes closed, but then were put off by his aloofness. The braver of the two finally mustered up the courage.
Excuse me, do we wait here for the bus bound for Loveland Hospital?
Probably bored by the wait, Shaw opened his eyes. He squinted his narrow eyes and asked casually,
What are you going to the hospital for?
Because...
The moment the girl opened her mouth to speak, her companion stopped her by tugging at her clothes. Despite her sheepish demeanor, the latter questioned Shaw cautiously.
What's it to you? It's none of your business.
Shaw casually stretched and shrugged.
You answer my question, and I'll answer yours. That's what I call a fair deal.
As if spooked, the girls hesitated for a moment and left the station. With his arms folded, Shaw glanced sideways at the girls as they hurried off and frowned in frustration.
Boring.
He pouted and checked the time again. 7:50. Time had never been slow as it was now. He grew impatient and gazed toward a nearby green belt with a grim frown. Another bus number 330 arrived. After giving the bus a quick glance, Shaw closed his eyes again and his frown deepened, contorting his face. He started to think that maybe he was mistaken. With his back against the platform, he automatically raised his right hand to stroke the string of beads in his left hand. A few minutes later, his frown relaxed a bit, and his ragged breathing regained the normal rhythm. Just as his frown was about to clear up, a stranger spoke to him.
Why aren't you getting on the bus, kiddo?
It was a middle-aged janitor who had been around for more than half an hour. Shaw kept his eyes shut. He replied word by word.
I'm waiting for someone.
The moment the clock struck 8, a muffled honk sounded, and another bus number 330 appeared. In a show of impatience, the driver brought the bus to an abrupt stop in front of the platform. A beautiful profile lurched forward along with long strands of hair. Next to the platform, Shaw raised the corner of his mouth in a cheeky smile and took a stride forward. He finally got on the bus. The moment he entered the bus door, his eyes were drawn to a girl wearing a light-colored dress. He raised his head to peek at her through his messy bang and happened to meet the girl's curious gaze. He quickly looked away. Shaw immediately took 2 steps forward. There were plenty of empty seats, but acting as if he was up to something, he sat down next to the girl. He could tell his presence made the girl uncomfortable, but he didn't care. A smile flashed across half of his face that the girl couldn't see. He stood the skateboard up between his seat and the girl's, and just as he expected, the girl cast a curious sideways glance. Pretending that nothing was happening, he crossed his legs and took out his music player again, all the while secretly monitoring the girl's reaction with the corner of his eye. At this moment, the song Holiday played in his earphones. He deliberately fiddled with that old, weirdly shaped music player in his hand. Then he cranked up the volume, and the faint sound of upbeat music rose in the silent bus. The girl grew more curious and ran her eyes over his body. Shaw took in the attention the girl lavished on him. Little did the girl know that the drum beats in his heart had reached a fever pitch and that his undercurrents of emotion had blossomed into tidal waves. It was time for the curtain to rise. Shaw drew down his eyelids, trying his utmost to conceal the excitement in his eyes. When the girl's curious eyes fell on him again, Shaw raised his eyebrow and glanced toward her. The moment their eyes met, the girl panicked and quickly looked away. The girl's flustered reaction emboldened Shaw.
"Wanna listen?"
He curled up the corner of his mouth and asked with a half smile. This brief conversation was punctuated by a faint click sound. The missing cog finally started turning again. Let the show begin.